syllabus of coursework, paper 1, is this, The Art of Literary Research. The Art of Literary Research by Richard L. Tick and John Fenstermaker. So from this book, we are referring to a couple of chapters for our coursework. Now, this book is not about the technicality of writing. Like literature review is something technical, or later on we will say about academic writing, again something technical about writing. So in research, we find that there are two sides or two ways of looking at it. One is the technical side of writing or data collection and putting data into a particular scientific method. That all is one part. And the another is about the mindset, the softer part, or we can say if the technical side is the hardware, then this is the software. So in that sense, we get this terms, like we call it research scholar, like your identity is like a research scholar. So, well, we get these words. There is a critic, there is a researcher, and there is a scholar. Now, what is this? What is it to be a critic? What is it to be a researcher? And how do we define scholarship or being a scholar there? So this is that softer part of understanding these words and trying to say that what actually a critic is doing, or researcher is doing, or scholar is doing. There are no watertight compartments, and many of these words are interchangeably used also. By and large, researcher and scholar, or research scholar, that is how normally the words are used interchangeably also. But if you want to differentiate and we want to say exactly who is who, or when I am doing something, who am I? In one individual, one can be a critic also, and then one can be a researcher also, and then one can be a scholar also. One person itself, like it sometimes depends upon what am I doing? What am I doing with the text or my topic? How am I approaching my topic? That perhaps decides that am I a critic, a researcher, or a scholar here. Okay? So here we find that it says here, underlying this chapter, the premise that the literary scholar and the critic, are engaged in common pursuit. Their pursuit is common. Maybe perhaps to do some kind of research, and for that we have to read a lot, and then lots of things are very common in so far as the process of or activity of scholar or critic is concerned. Their pursuits are common, so that the findings of one is indispensable for the another one. Critics' findings are very, very important for scholars, and scholars' findings are very useful to critic also. Now, we can see this relation in such a way that though both of them are pursuing the similar kind of objectives, goals, and their work is indispensable to both of them, then how can we understand this? Now, for example, critic is the one, when we will differentiate in the next paragraph, we will say that critic is the one who is dealing with a poem or a literary text. And while working on that poem, he may be using some kind of findings or some kinds of interpretations which are done by some other scholars. So as a critic, I am reading a poem, but to interpret the poem, I am using some work of some scholar. So scholar's work is useful to critic, but scholar cannot do interpretation without doing what critic is necessarily doing. That is reading a particular poem, reading poem as a text. Without that, scholar cannot have any other kinds of hermeneutics also. That way, both the works are useful to each other. Now, see what kind of differences are given here for this. Some professional students of literature prefer to regard themselves primarily as critics. Some would say that, well, I am a critic. Well, some would say that I am a scholar. Now, but the dichotomy between the two is far more apparent than real. The dichotomy between the two is far more apparent than real, and every good student of literature every good student of literature is constantly combining the two roles, often without knowing it. So now what is very important here is that where am I as a critic, and where do the boundary of critic is reached, and then how far I cross the boundary of being a critic and enter into the realm of scholarship, going beyond that. Now, in this discussion, it is clear that being a scholar is something higher than being only a critic. Critic is something, in that sense, being at a lower level, and being a scholar is you are expanding your horizon of looking at the things also. So at least that idea becomes clear when we see this wordings here. The difference is mainly one of emphasis. The difference is one of emphasis. What is emphasized more? And then I can become a critic, or I can cross over the boundary of critic and become a scholar. The critic's business is, or the critic is primarily concerned with literary work, itself. He is primarily concerned with literary work itself, and here he will study style, structure, or content, ideas of a literary text. But the primary concern, the major concern here is literary work itself, when that is dealt here. Scholar, on the other hand, are more concerned with the facts attending its genesis. It means literary works, genesis and subsequent history. So now let us see what is this difference. Literary critic is concentrating on the work that is being read, a particular text, style, structure, content, ideas, whatever, genre study, everything is done. But as soon as the same reader starts locating a particular work of art into a larger context of genesis or historical context, he becomes a scholar. So we can see here that critic is the one who has a narrow insight into a literary work of art, which also is necessary for any reader or a scholar. At the same time, the scholar will be able to locate that work of art in a larger context, the genealogy of the work, from genesis of the work, from there to subsequent historical context of that particular work.
Sir,
Believing
writing is not readable.
Yes?
Sir, writing is not readable.
Okay, I think the mirror image. Yeah, okay. Yeah, is it readable now? Yeah, is it readable? Yeah,
Yes.
okay. Thank you for drawing that.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. Okay. The mirror image, the flipping was not done. Yeah, okay. So this we see. Now, believing that every work of art must be seen from without as well as within. Every work of art must be seen from without plus within. Yes. Maybe this is trying to see the work within only, perhaps, and this is trying to see both the things, without as well as within. They seek to illuminate it from every conceivable angle to make it as intelligible as possible by uncovering an application of data residing outside itself. So from whatever angle a work of art can be investigated, can be seen, whatever things can be uncovered, that work, when one person is doing, he is performing a job of a scholar, going beyond the job of a critic here. ultimate beneficiaries. In this distinction, who is ultimate beneficiary? In this work at this level, when this work is done profoundly, it is criticism that is ultimately benefited here, and here literary history is benefited at this level. Now in this also, what we see here is that this scholar is history minded. He is, we can say, history minded. So a person with historical sense. In researcher also we will see that, well, researcher also needs to be history minded or with a historical sense. At that level, when a researcher develops these capacities, then scholar will jump to another plane of the existence. As a reader, he will jump to that. But in context of critic, right now we are not seeing researcher. In context of critic and the scholar, here it is the criticism that is benefited with these activities, and here there is entire literary history that is benefited. Now, if you want an examples for all this thing, then here you can say new criticism. I.A. Richards, T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot still talks about tradition and other kinds of things. So he is trying to be like a scholar. But practical criticism, which Cleanth Brooks, Wimsatt, I.A. Richards, what they have talking about, that is more about criticism. Here, if you want to use another word which goes with criticism, then you can say that you are entering into theories, or you are developing theories here. You are doing particular criticism here, but here you are entering into the realms of theories also, more general grammar of reading literature, that you are entering with development of theories in this aspect here. Here, if you put here new critics, then here you can put people like, or structuralists like Northrop Frye, who wanted to see world literature as one literature, and wanted to see that one common skeleton exists in all the literatures. If you remove language and a kind of a thing, then a similar skeleton is perceivable in world literature. So that is what is a larger way of looking, or the context that becomes very important here. So that is critic, the scholar at this level here. There is interesting observation given by George Valley. George Valley gives an interesting observation. And the work is scholarship and criticism. Scholarship and criticism, which was published in 1959. 1959. In this work, he is giving a very interesting observation here. I'm reading a small paragraph. No true scholar can lack critical acumen. So if you say critic are those who are having critical acumen, but no scholar will be lacking critical acumen, and the scholar's eye is rather like a poet's, but not poets, not in a sense like he is in frenzy or under the influence of muse. Not in that sense, the poet's eye, but at least looking for something as yet unknown, which it knows it will find, with perceptions heightened and modified by the act of looking. So the poet's eye always in search of something that is unknown. That way, scholar is constantly looking at a work of art, that what is unknown, which can be perceived, and that sight is not without critical acumen. So Scholar here we find is having critical acumen plus poet's eye, plus poet's eye also, in a way to look for what we see in terms of unknown things to be found out. For knowing is qualitatively and is profoundly affected by the reason for wanting to know. Again, it is clear that no critic can afford not to be a scholar. Then, at the same time, no critic can afford not to be a scholar. Even a scholar is a pretty impressive degree if his work is to go much beyond delicate impressionism or mere verbal rhetoric or marginal schematism. So if he has to take his work beyond just stylistic study, structuralist study and the other things only, then he has to have an insight of what we call it as scholar. This is George Valley, scholarship and criticism, where he differentiates this. Without a scholarship, every synoptic view will be cursory. Every attempt at a synthesis, a wind egg. Without scholarship, the criticism of a poem may easily become a free fantasia on a non-existent theme. And now we can say that why this is important, why George Valley's this observation is very important for the research scholars. This is to prove the point that if you just do analysis of the work that you are doing and you are not able to locate your work into the larger context of theories, into the discourses which are going on, the genesis of those things or the history in which it is located, then your work is an incomplete work. And for this, what you require is theoretical framework. A larger theoretical framework is required. Many scholars, we have seen that they do not like to study theoretical frameworks. They don't want to study the larger context of this. They are much interested in a particular text that is at hand. And that is why many scholars say that, well, I like this writer, I like this work, so I want to do study in that. Now, obviously, likeness is not very important parameter to do research. That is one thing. But still, you are beginning from a text. Now, what we have to begin is from the genesis. We have to begin from the historical perspective, and there the text becomes something important. So text is not a very important thing. What is important thing is this part, that how we see the things in a larger historical context, or larger theoretical framework. That is more important, and therein the text comes. So text can be this or that, it doesn't matter. Where are you locating and studying? That is more important. So scholars' insight is very, very important to move out from the critics' way of doing the things. But remember, you can't do this without working out in a way like critics are supposed to read the things and do minute studies of those things also here. Further in the same chapter, we find that it mentions something about researcher now here. Researcher must have, it says, researcher must have a vivid sense of history. Vivid sense of history. Researcher must have a vivid sense of history. The ability to cast themselves back into another age. Vivid sense of history. Ability to cast themselves. As an individual, if I am a research scholar, I am able to take myself through the time machine in the past, or wherever the text is unfolding or my ideas are unfolding. I can time travel and take myself into that. In that sense, it is said, vivid sense of history. That is an ability to cast themselves back into another age. Now, another age, cast itself into another age. Now, age is not only time. It is time, but it is not only time. It is discipline also. It is a discipline.
Battery low.
It is discipline, as well as you can say it is also this will keep on. Okay, fine. Discipline or subject, or what we see is that any other topics which are subsequently necessary to be understood, any of these things. So by discipline I mean history, social sciences, economics, psychology, that all becomes the other disciplines. This, so time as well as this another age means that also they must be able to adjust their intellectual sides, and imaginative response to the system of thought and social and cultural atmosphere that prevailed in, say, 14th century England or early 20th century America. So the range that is there, that you may be shifting from, say, for example, 5,000 years back of Vedic time of Ramayana to the 21st century where we are now living, that range of time. And what is necessary here? Intellectual insights plus imaginative response. This becomes very important. Literary work by and large, or studies of English studies, is by and large about interpretations. Lots of interpretations are necessary, and if we are highly imaginative, then we can have wonderful interpretations. But at the same time, those interpretations are to be supported by some evidence. So we require intellectual insights also. It should not be like it is only fantasia. We are just talking or assuming only in our interpretations, but our interpretations are to be supported by the intellectual insight. It means a scientific way of working on all these things. Further, it says here, researcher must be able to think as people, the people who thought when they were living with Newton, or even before that, of any of those times, or educating them in the laws of physics, or to fantasize as people fantasized when Byron was spinning out his Oriental romances. Otherwise, they cannot comprehend the current attitudes or artistic assumptions that guided an author as he or she set pen to paper. At the same time, scholars, see the word scholar now suddenly come. So interchangeably the word research, the scholar, but we can differentiate here. At the same time, the scholar must retain their footing in the 21st century for the sake of the indispensable perspective the historian needs. Their sense of the past then must be double vision. It might have double vision, this, and the pastness of the past as well as the use of that in the present. So now from this, if you try to see the difference between researcher and scholar, this relation, then we can say researcher is the one who remains rooted or has an ability to go back in past with whatever work they are dealing. He can time travel and go into the past, can understand the pastness of the past. These words are coming from Eliot's essay, Traditional Individual Talent, and can very quickly see this pastness in present time. So when you are rooted in today, 21st century, you are a scholar. But if you are only in this without pastness, you are not a researcher. You are a mere scholar here. But the relation between researcher and the scholar is like the researcher with vivid sense of history has an ability to time travel in past at any time and can understand that when the words might be written on the paper, then what might be the aura of the time, what might be the culture of the time, what might be the inventions of the sciences of those days. And then quickly you use that or see that in terms of present moment also. Now this point, he says that the last he says that it means that what researcher needs to have is that complete attachment with the past as well as detachment with the past. He has to go deep into the time and quickly come out from that time and come very quickly into the present moment also. It is said here, further it writes that the literary scholar need to be as rigorous as their method in sciences, or like scientists, his method has to be very rigorous. That is scholars work. Very rigorous, like scientists, like people work in science. Now, what is it to work like scientist? What is it to be like a scientist? What is that? So it says that, and indeed, a background in science is almost as good preparation for literary research as is one in law or newspaper work, because some of the same qualities are required. For example, intellectual curiosity. What is this? Scientists do, or the other discipline also came along with that, is about law and newspaper, but that we will take afterwards. What is that to be work like a scientist is? It is intellectual curiosity, shrewdness, precision, imagination, the lively inventiveness that constantly suggests new hypotheses, new strategies, new sources of information, and when all the data are in, makes possible their accurate interpretation and evaluation. This is what it says, like scientist one has to work. This is very near to what Northrop Frye also was telling in Archetypes of Literary Criticism, that if his concern was that the way there is a value of the study of physics, biology, sciences in terms of applied as well as pure, why the discipline of criticism or researches in English or in literature and humanities do not have that value, why it is not happening. And he said that because the people working in sciences, they do the work in a more systematic way, whereas in humanities, people keep on working in wherever they are, in the nook and corner they work, but they do not assemble together. They do not brighten the entire dark room, but wherever they are, they put their candle on and they are just brightening the corner. Whereas in sciences, they all come with their candles and they brighten the entire room. And for that, what becomes necessary? Let me repeat these words again. For any scholars, these are necessary thing. Intellectual curiosity, shrewdness, precision, imagination, lively inventiveness that constantly suggests new hypotheses, new strategies, new sources of information, and when all the data are in, when everything you have, make possible their accurate interpretations and evaluation. This becomes very important for the scholar